The stricken airliner is plunging toward the ocean at a terrifying speed. Cockpit alarms blare, the screams of passengers, the crash of their luggage, and a blow to the ceiling all merge. The inverted plane is falling closer and closer to the sea. In this moment of terror and despair, can the pilots bring this out-of-control aircraft safely back to a nearby airport? Hello, my name is Chariot. What I'm sharing with you today is a human spark. The tragic story of an individual's struggle against corporate greed. January 31st, 2000. The Mexican beach resort of Puerto Vallarta. The sun is shining. 83 passengers and 5 crew members boarded Alaska Airlines Flight 261. The travelers were finishing their vacation in Mexico, preparing to return to the United States. As scheduled, this flight would make a stop at San Francisco International Airport in California, then take off again, heading for its final destination, Seattle. Flight 261 was operated by an aircraft from McDonnell Douglas, 8 years old. The MD-83 airliner was designed and built for long-haul flights. This aircraft was an improved version of the MD-80 series, equipped with 2 Pratt & Whitney JT8D219 turbofan engines. It had a maximum range of 4,600 kilometers, making it the longest-range model in the MD-80 series. The 2 pilots flying the plane were the 53-year-old Captain Theodore Ted Thompson and the 57-year-old First Officer William Bill Tansky. Captain Thompson was a veteran pilot whose total flight time exceeded 17,000 hours. He had worked for Alaska Airlines for 18 years and also served as a ground and flight instructor. First Officer Bill Tansky joined Alaska Airlines after retiring from the Navy. He had accumulated 8,140 hours of flight time. Both pilots had impeccable safety flight records. Tansky was designated pilot flying for the San Francisco leg, in charge of flying the plane. He was responsible for controlling the aircraft. Captain Thompson, as pilot monitoring, was responsible for communication and monitoring the aircraft. At 1:37 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, Flight 261-866 entered runway 20 at Puerto Vallarta Airport. Runway 20. A moment later, they received takeoff clearance. Captain Thompson pushed the throttles forward, then handed control over to the first officer to fly. The 2 Pratt & Whitney JT8D engines roared, launching the 62-ton aircraft into the sky. First Officer Tansky flew the plane, climbing to 6,000 feet, manually controlling it the entire time. Blue sky, an endless ocean view. It was a perfect day for flying. An absolute delight. But it didn't last. As the plane climbed through 23,400 feet, an autopilot light illuminated in the cockpit, a warning for trim failure. This was the first indication of a serious problem with the aircraft. The elevator. The MD-80 series airliner has 2 horizontal stabilizers installed at the rear. This small wing at the top of the vertical fin not only provides pitch stability for the aircraft, but can also be moved up and down to adjust the aircraft's attitude. For example, to maintain a climb, the pilot just needs to adjust the horizontal stabilizer downward. This changes the pitch force on the plane. The plane will maintain a specific nose-up attitude. The pilot doesn't have to constantly pull the control column back to adjust the elevator to make the plane pitch up. The existence of this system reduces the pilot's workload when handling the aircraft and allows passengers to enjoy a more comfortable flight. The structural design of the horizontal stabilizer control is quite simple. Think of it as a common screw combined with a nut. In the tail of the plane, a thick threaded jack screw is used. It passes through a fixed nut. This is a mechanical actuator. When the motor starts, it rotates the jack screw like a screw. This causes the entire horizontal stabilizer to swing up and down. When this huge screw is turned up, the horizontal stabilizer pitches up when the plane pitches down and the screw is turned down. The horizontal stabilizer pitches down, and the plane pitches up. At the upper and lower ends of the jack screw, safety limiters are also installed to prevent over-adjustment of the horizontal stabilizer and ensure flight safety. Now that we've explained the principle and structure of the horizontal stabilizer and trim system, let's go back to the cockpit of Flight 261. The autopilot trim warning light alerted the pilots that the autopilot computer could no longer move the horizontal stabilizer for automatic trimming. This failure had two possible causes. Either the stabilizer motor had stopped working, or the stabilizer was jammed. Tansky, who was operating the plane, saw the warning light, disconnected the autopilot, and tested the aircraft's handling by manually flying. He found that he had to pull the control column back with significant force to keep the plane level. Air traffic control instructed them to continue climbing. The two pilots immediately took out the quick checklist. Following the procedure, they attempted to cycle the trim motor. They checked the trim motor circuit breaker. After trying both the electric trim and manual trim, the horizontal stabilizer still did not move. According to the subsequent investigation, the safest course of action then was to immediately return to Puerto Vallarta Airport. However, there were flaws in the quick checklist. The checklist neither required the crew to prioritize diverting to the nearest airport when experiencing such a failure, nor did it suggest that the plane was likely suffering a mechanical failure that could lead to a chain reaction. After the plane reached its cruising altitude of 31,000 feet, First Officer Tansky noticed that the force required on the control column had become much lighter. For them, even if there was a problem with the electric motor, they could still rely on the elevator to continue on to San Francisco. So, after an hour of manual flight, they switched the autopilot back on. In the next hour, the two pilots began to try using the electric trim switch on the yoke and the manual trim wheel on the console, sometimes called the suitcase handle, to adjust the trim. However, the horizontal stabilizer remained stuck. They tried using the backup trim motor, but it didn't work either. Therefore, they pinned their hopes on the electrical system again. They reset the electric motor circuit breaker once more. However, the horizontal stabilizer was still jammed at a 0.4-degree nose-down position. So, at 3:49 p.m., Captain Thompson contacted Alaska Airlines Seattle Maintenance Base. They made contact. Captain Thompson was displeased with the company's approach. He told First Officer Tansky, "They're driving me nuts. Not that I want to go on about it, you know. It just blows me away. They think we're going to land, they're going to fix it, now they're worried about the flow. I'm sorry, this airplane isn't going to go anywhere for a while. So, they're trying to put pressure on you." After a few minutes, the dispatcher agreed to Captain Thompson's request. The two pilots began preparations to divert to Los Angeles Airport. They planned to circle for a while to consume fuel and reduce the landing weight. At the same time, they would test the aircraft's handling capabilities to prevent the aircraft from suddenly losing control at low speed. Subsequently, Captain Thompson took control of the plane. When he again used the electric trim switch to attempt a trim adjustment, he noticed that there was a load on the left side of the aircraft. This indicated that the horizontal stabilizer electric motor was working fine. So what was the problem that prevented the horizontal stabilizer from moving? This story must begin 10 years earlier. In the 1990s, Alaska Airlines suffered record losses. To cut costs, the airline extended its aircraft maintenance intervals. They extended the lubrication interval for the horizontal stabilizer jack screw assembly from the manufacturer's recommended 500 flight hours since the aircraft was built in 1987 to every 8 months in 1999. While this might work in theory, it is only true if the grease is applied correctly every time. According to the aircraft manufacturer's regulations, the procedure should take about 4 hours to complete. However, the maintenance service at Alaska Airlines completed this work order in just 1 hour. This was not because they had cleverly found a better lubrication method, but because mechanics under pressure simply skipped some steps to get the plane back to flying quickly. Therefore, the wear rate of these under-lubricated nuts, as it explains the wear rate exceeding 10 times the norm, and details John Leotin's inspection rejection, which has already been summarized in the naturalized English below, and cited from original sources 238 to 243 in the draft above. Over the next 3 years, maintenance personnel were required to lubricate the horizontal stabilizer jack screw once every 8 months. During a lubrication operation in September 1999, a mechanic in San Francisco failed to lubricate the jack screws of all the planes he worked on. They received no lubrication. This included the jack screw of this Flight 261 aircraft. As lubrication problems accumulated, the dry screw had its nut threads worn down by 90%. That's why, 2 hours before Flight 261 climbed to 23,400 feet, the severely worn threads had jammed around the jack screw. The horizontal stabilizer was mechanically completely locked. At 4:09 p.m., unaware that the horizontal stabilizer had suffered a mechanical failure, Captain Thompson disconnected the autopilot, ready to try moving the horizontal stabilizer again. After the autopilot was disconnected, the aerodynamic load produced on the stabilizer exceeded the already severely worn bearing limit of the nut. The jack screw completely stripped all the threads on the nut. The nut had lost its function of fixing the horizontal stabilizer. The air pushed the horizontal stabilizer up to 3.1 degrees. The lower safety limiter on the jack screw hit the nut. The 2 pilots heard 2 loud bangs. The plane began a sharp dive. Although Captain Thompson immediately pulled the control column back with full force, the plane was like a wild horse, diving with frantic acceleration. Center, Alaska 261, we are in a dive here. Alaska 261, say again. Yeah, we're out of 26,000 feet. We are in a vertical dive. We have lost vertical control of our airplane. The sharply diving plane triggered a high-speed alarm. Facing the rapidly approaching blue sea, in a time of crisis filled with windshield noise, the 2 pilots pulled the control column back with all their strength, trying to regain control. In just 80 seconds, the plane descended 7,500 feet. The 2 pilots gave it their all and finally managed to stabilize the plane at an altitude of 23,500 feet. However, at this moment, they had to apply 30 kilograms of force pulling the yoke back to barely keep the plane in level flight. So, that's Alaska 261, take condition. 261, all right, 24,000 feet, kind of stabilized. We're level here and we're going to choose a couple shooting. Can you give me a block between 20 and 25? Alaska 261, I'll take that block. We'll be Monica Crates. Read by level 200, 2 by level 250. Alaska 261, I'll take that block. We'll be monitoring. The controller agreed to Captain Thompson's request for an altitude block to prevent Flight 261 from getting out of control and colliding with other aircraft. You had the airplane. My adrenaline's going. It was really tough there for a while. The continued strong pullback force made Captain Thompson's arms sore. He traded flying duties with First Officer Tansky. But this struggle against the aircraft, which relied only on physical strength, was not a long-term solution. Captain Thompson thought slowing the plane down might reduce the required control force, because as the speed decreases, the aerodynamic forces on the flight controls also decrease. I'm thinking, can it get any worse? But when we slow down, let's slow it. Let's get it down to 200 knots and see what happens. Captain Thompson slowly slowed the plane down to 200 knots and gradually extended the flaps and slats. This way, they could also test the flight characteristics during the landing configuration to ensure the plane was still controllable in the final stage. Subsequently, Captain Thompson contacted the local engineers in Los Angeles They made contact. He reported the horizontal stabilizer jam problem, but the engineers on the ground could offer no solution. This meant that the two pilots had to deal with this airborne crisis, which could be fatal at any time, without any technical guidance from the ground. LA, Alaska 261, we're with you. We are at 225 knots. We have a jammed stabilizer and we're maintaining altitude with difficulty, but we can maintain altitude, we think. And our intention is to land at Los Angeles. Alaska 261, roger. You're cleared to Los Angeles Airport via present position. Direct Santa Monica, 01416 900 direct Los Angeles. And you want lower now? Or what do you want to do, sir? Center, Alaska 261, I need to get down to about 10,000 feet, change my configuration. Make sure I can control the jet. And I'd like to do that out here over the bay. Despite LA Center approving the flight to fly directly to Los Angeles International Airport, Captain Thompson still decided to circle and descend over the Pacific Ocean first. This experienced pilot knew that if the plane lost control again, it would not only endanger the 88 lives on board, but could also cause catastrophic consequences in densely populated areas. Over the next few minutes, the deceleration approach proved effective. First Officer Tansky no longer had to pull the control column back with all his might, and the plane was level again. However, the physical strength of the two pilots was nearing its limit. The plane barely maintained control in a critical state. The captain wanted to adjust the plane's attitude to let the Air Force the horizontal stabilizer back to normal. He had the first officer retract the flaps and slats and accelerated the plane to 250 knots. However, the first officer opposed his plan. Tansky believed the plane was manageable for now and they shouldn't risk trying an experiment that might make the situation worse. Captain Thompson took the first officer's advice, telling him to extend the flaps again. Captain Thompson required the crew to immediately secure all loose items and ensure every passenger was wearing a seatbelt before the eventual landing in Los Angeles. 10 minutes after the first dive, the horizontal stabilizer was still positioned against the lower limiter, fixed at an upward-pitched position of 3.1 degrees. The huge aerodynamic force should have been absorbed by the nut holding the jack screw, but now, these stresses were transferred to the limiter. This device was only designed as a limit stop and could not withstand that much stress. In just 10 minutes, the limiter cracked. At 4:19 p.m., the cracked limiter fell off the jack screw. The entire horizontal stabilizer was now only fixed to the plane by the main pivot. Under the action of the air, it began to flap violently up and down. The top of the stabilizer came completely off. Only 3 seconds passed. The fairing was penetrated. The horizontal stabilizer, with no constraints above or below, flew up to a position of 14 degrees. Flight 261 suddenly assumed a nearly vertical attitude and began a terrifying climb. Facing a sudden second loss of control, the two pilots immediately pulled the control column back, trying to regain control of the plane. But the massive upward-tilted horizontal stabilizer applied a huge downward force to the aircraft. It was like an elephant sitting on the opposite end of a seesaw. Although the pilots extended the flaps and slats and slowed down, the plane's pitch angle still increased to 70 degrees. They had lost control of this plane. The position of the plane. Hi there. Doesn't fit. That plane has just started to do a big, huge plunge. That aircraft is definitely inverted in a nose-down position. That's descending quite rapidly. Two nearby pilots witnessed Flight 261's rapid climb with their own eyes. In the face of such a desperate situation, Captain Thompson made an extreme, unprecedented emergency decision. Since the failed horizontal stabilizer continued to produce a downward force, then by turning the plane upside down, this deadly downward force would turn into an upward force. It would become a lift. Captain Thompson immediately began to push the control column left. The plane rolled 180 degrees to the left. This 50-ton McDonnell Douglas aircraft began flying inverted, in the air. Captain Thompson's emergency measure worked. The nose-up angle of the plane decreased from 70 degrees to 28 degrees. The two pilots and the passengers behind them were suspended upside down inside the cabin. Captain Thompson had to overcome the maneuvering difficulties caused by gravity and the precisely opposite control logic to continue controlling the plane. At the same time, First Officer Tansky retracted the flaps and slats. These actions further reduced the aircraft's pitch angle, slowing the descent to 9 degrees. Although the plane was still descending, compared to the previous vertical dive, this unusual emergency flight maneuver did slow the plane's descent. The two pilots were still fighting for this runaway airliner in their final struggle. Are we flying? We're flying. Tell them what we're doing. We gotta get it over again. At least upside down, we're flying.
Unfortunately, no airliner was specifically designed for this type of maneuver, which exceeds the aircraft's own structural design limits. The engines also failed to sustain normal combustion in this attitude. A series of loud bangs indicated that the compressors could no longer get sufficient air intake. The plane was rapidly losing power. Captain Thompson attempted to roll the plane back over again. He asked the first officer to help him with the steering. However, the inverted Tansky could not reach the controls. In the final moments, Captain Thompson still did not give up. He asked the first officer to extend the flaps. However, with the violent shaking of the fuselage and the rapid decrease in altitude, all emergency measures had been exhausted. At 4:20 p.m., Alaska Airlines Flight 261 crashed like a piece of scrap metal into the Pacific Ocean, 100 kilometers from Los Angeles. When the horizontal stabilizer jack screw was salvaged, a shocking fact was revealed to investigators. The screw surface had virtually no trace of lubricating oil. Severely damaged remnants of the nut were wrapped around the jack screw. Only some long-dried lubricating oil was attached to undamaged areas. The silent evidence clearly reconstructed the entire process of the stabilizer failure. As the investigation deepened, the National Transportation Safety Board discovered that Alaska Airlines had extended the jack screw lubrication and wear inspection intervals. What was even more shocking was that the Federal Aviation Administration approved Alaska Airlines' request to extend these two inspection intervals without confirming if the time was appropriate. The problems arising from the airline's cost-cutting were not only reflected in extending the aircraft maintenance intervals. Alaska Airlines had also downsized its fleet, and many mechanics hired had not received a formal training course before starting work. Security-related management positions had long-term vacancies. Therefore, the seemingly simple task of lubricating the jack screw was not immune to this deteriorating environment. For the aircraft itself, the McDonnell Douglas MD-80 series aircraft followed the horizontal stabilizer trim system's original DC-9 design from the 1960s. This architecture had a fatal flaw. When the threads of the nut were completely worn, no other structure could support the horizontal stabilizer. This single-point failure directly violated the most basic principle of aircraft design: redundancy. Key systems must have backup safety mechanisms in place. The National Transportation Safety Board believed that. If the crew had identified the horizontal stabilizer jam and returned to Puerto Vallarta immediately, this plane crash probably would not have occurred. The crew was unclear whether the stabilizer system had a mechanical jam or an electrical problem. Multiple attempts to move the stabilizer reduced the likelihood of a safe landing. However, from an objective perspective, multiple factors affected the crew's judgment. First, the quick checklist at the time did not instruct the pilot to land as soon as possible. Second, the pilots faced operational pressure to continue flying to the destination, San Francisco. Third, ground engineers failed to accurately evaluate the risks posed by the stabilizer failure. Despite these cognitive and decision biases, the investigation team highly commended the two pilots' professionalism demonstrated in the final stages and their extraordinary courage.
They even attempted the inverted flight maneuver, which is not taught in training. In recognition of their heroic actions, Captain Thompson and First Officer Tansky were posthumously awarded the Airline Pilots Association's highest honor, the Gold Medal of Heroism. Back in 1998, engineer John Leotin reported to the Federal Aviation Administration that his Oakland base had a serious problem of falsifying maintenance records. In August 1999, he was put on forced leave by the airline due to his reporting. Sadly, just a few months later, this nut that should have been replaced took the lives of 88 people. In the year 2000, Leotin filed a lawsuit against Alaska Airlines. The airline offered a $500,000 settlement on the condition that John Leotin voluntarily resigned from his job at Alaska Airlines. The good news is, Leotin's professionalism was recognized by the aviation industry. Now, he has taken up a teaching position at the National Aviation Academy. His professional experience in the field of aviation safety and professional ethics are teaching a new generation of aviation talent. I would like to quote the father of Abby Miller, a victim of Alaska Airlines Flight 261, Bush, a sentence he said in an interview to end this video. "What a cruel price a precious life is for the airline's will to profit."